The presidencies of Richard Nixon, who served from 1969 to 1974, and President Gerald Ford, who served from 1974 to 1977, defined American society during these times.
Richard Millis Nixon was born on January 9, 1913 in Yorba Linda, California. He grew up working in his father's grocery store and gas station with the rest of his family to make ends meet, as they were not financially well off. He attended Whittier College and became the class president by his senior year in 1934. In 1937, Nixon earned his law degree from Duke and returned home to practice law. He didn't return home from the war until 1946, when he pursued his career in politics. Between that point and his presidency, he had served on the Un-American Activities Committee, 2 terms in Congress, 1 term in the Senate, and 2 terms as the vice president of Dwight D. Eisenhower. Nixon had a long list of noteworthy achievements in his domestic policy throughout his 1.5 terms as president. In 1972, Nixon pushed for the passage of the 26th Amendment, which allowed people who were 18 years of age the right to vote. In 1972, Nixon signed Title IX, preventing all gender bias at universities and allowing female participation in collegiate sports. In 1973, he ended the draft, which was still in effect from Vietnam, finally making the U.S. military completely volunteer. Additionally, Nixon was able to desegregate Southern schools, set up the Environmental Protection Agency, lead a fight against cancer, end the forced assimilation of Native Americans, and go after organized crime, leading to 2,500 convictions by 1973.
Nixon pursued 2 important foreign policies in 1972. In February, he visited Beijing to strengthen relations with the People's Republic of China. In May, he traveled to the Soviet Union, negotiating arms control, disarmament measures, and signing agreements of SALT I. Although improvements in relations with the Soviet Union and the People's Republic of China signaled a possible end to the Cold War, international relations still remained tense. The international economy experienced considerable instability as well. Nixon's other foreign policies include the creation of the Bureau of Oceans and International Environment and Scientific Affairs, or OES, which handled environmental issues such as wildlife conservation, population matters, and maintaining oceans. Despite Nixon's achievements as president, such as forging diplomatic ties with China and the Soviet Union, as well as withdrawing U.S. troops from Vietnam, he is best remembered as the only president to ever resign from office after the controversial Watergate scandal. His involvement in Watergate tarnished his legacy and deepened American resentment and skepticism regarding the government. After the scandal, the role of journalism in American society increased significantly. Journalists played a large role in uncovering Nixon's ties to the burglars who stole copies of top-secret documents and attempted to bug the Democratic National Committee's headquarters phones. After Nixon resigned, Vice President Gerald Ford assumed his place as president.
Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow. Vice President Ford will be sworn in as president at that hour in this office.
Gerald Ford was born in 1913 and grew up in Grand Rapids, Michigan. In 1948, he became the representative of Michigan's 5th Congressional District and would hold this office for 24 years. His conservative policies, but willingness to listen to opposing viewpoints, and his friendly demeanor led him to prominence in the Republican Party. Ford was eventually chosen to be the House Minority Leader in 1956. Gerald Ford assumed the presidency on August 9, 1974, the day after Nixon's resignation. Ford remains the only president to have not been elected president or vice president. On September 8, 1974, Gerald Ford granted Nixon an absolute pardon for any of the crimes Nixon might have committed while in office.
For I, Gerald R. Ford, President of the United States, have granted, and by these presents do grant, a full, free, and absolute pardon unto Richard Nixon.
Outrage ensued after this pardon, and Ford's popularity decreased significantly. Nonetheless, Ford's main issue was the economy. Inflation was extremely high, and unemployment was rampant, as many baby boomers were looking for jobs. Faced with an economic crisis known as stagflation, Ford started the Whip Inflation Now, or WIN program, to promote public support for his economic programs. He asked people to wear buttons with win on them, but the media saw it as a public relations gimmick and was unsuccessful. Throughout his presidency, Ford advocated for tax cuts and limited federal spending, but the Democrat-controlled Congress greatly opposed this. Although inflation and unemployment lessened by the end of Ford's term, the economy was still very stagnant. The energy crisis was another major problem that Ford had to confront. Ford hoped to impose a tariff on imported oil, end maximum price regulations on oil, and tax domestic oil producers, which he thought was a necessity. Some of these desires manifested themselves in an omnibus energy bill, which Ford signed in 1975, calling for a 12% reduction on oil prices and giving Ford the ability to end price controls on oil for 40 months.
In regards to foreign policy, Ford was familiar with the major international issues facing the country before he became president, so he was more prepared to address them. Ford wanted to pursue a détente with the Soviet Union, which was the lessening of their tensions that had existed since the end of World War II. One such accomplishment was the Helsinki Accords, in which the USSR recognized the existing boundaries of European countries and included statements in support of human rights. Ford continued negotiating military contracts with the Soviet Union, but neither country was able to compromise. The Ford administration also faced the end of the Vietnam War. Fearful of the domino theory, Ford asked Congress for more military aid for the South Vietnamese government, but failed. This led to the end of the Vietnam War. Gerald Ford will always be remembered for his unconditional pardon of President Nixon. Ford understood that his most pressing task was to help the country move beyond the despair and distrust generated by the Watergate crisis. Looking back on the issue, some historians believe a trial would have made things worse and that the pardon was wise. However, the American people wanted punishment, and this led to a downfall in his popularity that he never really recovered from. In domestic affairs, the Ford administration failed to remedy the nation's economic problems, although by 1976 the economy began to recover from the previous year's recession. Nothing remarkable happened except the ending of the Vietnam War, which the U.S. lost. Ford was faced with a demanding political environment in which Democrats and conservative Republicans found fault with his leadership and his foreign and domestic policies, which led to his defeat in the 1976 election. Nonetheless, Ford was seen as a good man by the average American.
Some of America's most severe and impactful events in domestic and foreign policy occurred during the Nixon and Ford presidencies. Their reactions to these crises ultimately steered the course of the nation. The dissatisfaction that the American people felt towards both presidents ultimately led them to vote Democratic and elect Jimmy Carter as president in 1976.